is what I love about you all. I think that in this community, there's a real equality. And this JPEG for me by Libby van der Ploeg really sums it up for me, that not one person is at the top of the tree, but we're all giving each other a leg up or pulling somebody up behind us. And that's what, I'm not getting emotional. That's why I love you guys. I'm a bit emotional. Which brings me to Lisa. So Lisa is an incredibly special, creative person who shares so much in the world. And it's almost by chance that her career has developed. If she hadn't taken a painting class with her brother, maybe this wouldn't have happened for her. But she's now the author of many books, which are available for signing in the lunch hour. She has her paintings exhibited widely. She's an illustrator and she has a huge number of online classes. And she also blogs every day and she has year-long projects which share her creativity and her wonder with the world. And that's why we invited her here today. So please join me with great joy in welcoming Lisa Congdon to the stage.
Thank you. I always think it's like magic when I get up here and all of a sudden my microphone works. So as you can probably hear, I have a little bit of a cold. I travel all of the time and I often pinch myself because I'm one of those bionic people who never gets sick. But it actually happened this time, thankfully not very seriously, and that's actually what prevented me from going to the party last night. So I hope to get through this without any stumbles. I might be referring to my notes a little bit more than I normally would be because my head is a little bit fuzzy. I didn't sleep very well last night. You know when you have a cold and you have to sort of sleep sitting up so that everything drains this way? That was me last night in the place where I'm staying. So I wanted to learn a little bit more about you before I started. For how many of you is this your very first Blogtacular? Oh my God. Hands down. How many of you, is this your second is this the third year? Third year. Okay. So lots of newbies. Okay, so for those of you who have been here before, what is the best part of Blogtacular? Being inspired? Community. Sharing. Friends. Creativity. Inspiration. Okay, wonderful. Those are all things I'm going to touch on in my talk. So as Kat mentioned, I am an artist, an illustrator, and an author. I now live in Portland, Oregon, in the US. I've been in London now since Tuesday. I haven't been here since 1998, when I was 30 years old. And I have very vague memories of being here that time. I was traveling all over Europe on that trip. But I do know that it feels very different to me, the city, than it did then. The places that were very hip and cool at the time are now very touristy, and I'm sure in another 18 years that will all be flipped on its head. I'm so excited to be here. On my way here, I stopped in Iceland for a few days, which is a place near and dear to my heart. And so normally I'm sitting in my studio, not necessarily on a Saturday like today, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about my journey, but before I do that, for those of you who are interested in following me on Instagram or Twitter, where I'm not super active, but I am there. This is my username. The advantage of being an early adopter is that you get your first and last name as your username. And this is a little flavor of the kind of work that I do. So some of my work is digital. Everything that I do starts by hand. Some of my work is digital, some of it is hand-painted. I do a lot of pattern design. You can tell I have a definite color scheme. In the bottom middle, the quote there is something that Kat actually commissioned me to do last year for the Blogtacular planner. The Opening Keynote. Yeah, love hand lettering. So anyway, this is a little flavor of what I do, a combination of of line drawing and painting and lettering and all kinds of fun things. So a little bit about me and my journey. I didn't start painting or drawing until, as Kat mentioned, 17 years ago. By chance, I took an art class with my brother, who's 2 years older than I am. We had both actually just ended long relationships that we had been in during our 20s. And he was going back to school to get his landscape architecture degree, and we both had sort of newfound time on our hands, and he called me up and he said, I have to take this elective from the program that I'm in, and it's a painting class, and I was wondering if you would have any interest in taking this class with me. And since I had, a free schedule, I said sure, and it was on a Friday night, and I'm now convinced that the reason he asked me to take this class with him is he didn't want to go to an art class on a Friday night by himself, and that he was really just using me so that he didn't look like a big dork. But I did gladly go, and that class changed my life. And not overnight, and not in a big, immediate way, but it ended up leading me to where I am today. So I had zero experience with art. My mom is an artist, actually. But interestingly, in my household growing up, there was a lot of creative things going on, but I never imagined that I would grow up and become an artist. I wanted to do the very practical things. And so I went to school and became a teacher, and I worked in education for years. But I'm so happy that I took that painting class. And in the beginning, like most people who do things for the first time, I was fairly terrible at it. My work has really evolved over the last 17 years, and I've been a sort of professional artist for the last 10, and even in the last 10 years, my work has changed quite a bit. And for those of you, if there are any of you out there who've been following my work since I joined the online community back in 2004, you probably know that. So somewhere in the middle of all of that, as I just mentioned, this thing called the internet was starting to bubble up as a place for creative people, artists, makers, crafters, to share what they were making and connect with other people who were also making stuff. And I became part of that community early on. And this was before I had any aspirations to become a professional artist. I had a job, I was crafting, I was drawing, I was painting, I was making things, and I joined this place called Flickr, and which I like to call the original social media site for creative people. Now we have Instagram and Tumblr and Snapchat, which the girls at dinner the other night were trying to convince me that I should join, but I haven't yet. And these things called blogs were popping up everywhere. And these things called design blogs and lifestyle blogs were starting to pop up everywhere. And I started a blog in 2004. It's actually a different blog than I have now. I had two blogs before that blog that I started in 2011, which is my current blog, and I abolished both of them at some point and started over. So that space gave me a picture for what it could look like to potentially make a living as a creative person, as somebody who, and I didn't at the time know what that would look like. If it would be painting or drawing or crafting or photography or styling or blogging, I didn't know. But I got a sense that this is something I could potentially do, and that picture got sort of ingrained in my head. So I do a lot of things besides stand on stages and talk to people about things that I hope they'll find interesting. And I incidentally met Kat for the first time 2 years ago at Alt Summit, where I gave the opening keynote, which is like the American version of Blogtacular. And so I do stand up here and talk about my journey quite a bit. And so, as I mentioned, I'm an author, and I'm an illustrator, and I have a fine art practice. I do all kinds of things. And I'm also a writer and a blogger and a teacher. And one of the online platforms that I work with pretty intensively is CreativeBug. How many of you are familiar with CreativeBug? So it's an American company, and they produce classes for crafters and for folks who are interested in learning to draw and paint. And so I've been working with them for 4 or 5 years and have several classes with them. And they are launching a new program called CBTV, and it actually comes out on Tuesday, on the 22nd. And it's a documentary series about some of their most prominent teachers. And I am one of the people who's being featured on CBTV. So about earlier this year, they sent a crew of folks, so 3 people, 2 filmmakers and 1 producer, to my home and studio to follow me around in my life for 2 whole days, and also to film me doing what I do. And so this happens. They interviewed my assistant. They interviewed my wife. They interviewed all kinds of people, and they interviewed me about all kinds of things. And so towards the end of the 2 days, Brian, one of the filmmakers, he turned to me, and they had just finished shooting me painting and talking about what I was making. And he said, "Lisa, before we leave, I really want to show you some of this footage. It's really amazing. The light in your studio is beautiful, and I'm just so excited about what we've captured over the last couple of days." And so I walked over to his little film monitor, and as I watched, something very familiar happened. Inside my head, the following dialogue started. "Oh my God, I look so old now. Oh, I hate my profile. I wish they'd filmed me from another angle. Oh my God, I sound so weird. What on earth am I saying anyway?" All of this was running through my brain, while at the same time, I turned to Brian, smiling, of course, so as not to be rude. And I said politely, of course, "Oh, thank you so much for showing me. This is so great." The film crew left shortly thereafter. We hugged, and they made their way back to San Francisco. And for the next 24 hours, I felt an overriding feeling of discomfort. Why did I agree to let this video crew follow me around for 2 days? What a stupid idea. Now thousands of people were going to see what a giant dork I am. They're going to see the inside of my house and my studio, my life. And at some point, I realized I was having some version of a vulnerability hangover. So this is a term coined by American researcher Brené Brown. She actually studies this thing called vulnerability. And essentially, a vulnerability hangover is what happens when we do or say something that is big or vulnerable for us. And then at some point later, we think, usually the next day, "Holy shit, why did I say that? I want to run into a hole in the ground and hide." The truth is that this particular vulnerability hangover was not an isolated event for me. I've been having them my entire life. Not only do I have them every day after I give a public talk in front of an audience, talk to me tomorrow, I also have them the day after art openings and book signings or sharing long personal essays on my blog. And as it turns out, after I am followed around by a film crew for 2 days. In my personal life, I sometimes have them vulnerability hangovers after dinner parties when I've maybe had a few too many drinks and shared too much information about something, or after revealing something personal to a family member or a friend. How many of you can relate to what I'm saying? I mean, everyone. If you didn't raise your hand, you're not human. Sorry. So, and I think with social media and the internet, vulnerability hangovers are probably at an all-time high, right? Because we're in a new place in history. We have this culture of sharing. Our inward lives have become our outward lives, and our personal lives have become our public lives, especially if we, as many of us do, we live on the internet, right? We live our professional lives on the internet. We share our photos of our children and our homes and these things that are deeply personal to us. And the lines between public and private are often blurred. So a few days after the film crew left, I was talking to a friend about my vulnerability hangover. And she said, "It's so ironic that you feel this way, Lisa. You have a devoted following online. People are so inspired by your story, how you became an artist later in life. People admire you for being you. The fact that you're 48, you got a late start in your art career, you're openly gay, you don't hide who you are. They don't admire you for being some glossy, perfect, younger, prettier version of yourself that you wish you were. The stuff about you that you saw in that video that made you cringe, that's what makes you real to other people," she said. "That's what makes people relate to you." Here's another thing my friend told me. "You're not alone in feeling insecure about how you appear to others on the internet. We might think we're alone and everyone else has it all figured out. How can I be as confident or good looking or talented as them? But really, we're all a bit insecure, all of us." I realized my friend was right. On the one hand, I connect with people every day on the internet. Through my blog and Instagram, it's a huge gift in my life. Without the internet, there'd be no place to tell my story, no audience for my work. My career wouldn't exist. On the other hand, being on the internet every day is a really vulnerable place to be, and it's really hard work. Putting yourself out there every day is really hard work, and it's a very vulnerable place to be. It's a double-edged sword, essentially. On the one side, we have the potential to make a living, writing, making art, styling, blogging, illustrating, selling our products, doing what we love for an audience of people who love what we do. What could be better than that? And many of us have also made incredible friendships and connections on the internet. We come to things like this and we say, "It's so great to meet you. I've known you for 5 years," you know. And that's a really wonderful thing too. It's what brought us all here today together. And that's an amazing and beautiful thing. However, on the other side of the sword, the internet is a place where there's also competition and jealousy and a tendency to compare ourselves to other people. And there are haters and there are mean people and there are unknowns. We put ourselves out there every day and we do not know who is going to show up in return, or if anyone will like or comment or share our content. And it might be something we poured our heart into. And that is a vulnerable place to show up to every day. And because we are constantly showing up without knowing who will respond or show up in return, we have a tendency to overanalyze what we're doing right or what we're doing wrong. Maybe I'm too awkward. Maybe I share too much. Maybe I don't share enough. Maybe my photos aren't good enough. Maybe I'm not meant to be an artist. Maybe what I share just isn't that interesting. Maybe I'm not good looking enough or pretty enough or young enough. But here's the thing. We all have these thoughts from time to time. That gorgeous girl with the amazing blog who has this seemingly perfect life, she judges herself too. That artist who makes gorgeous work and gets 3,000 likes on every photo, she wishes she could make better, more interesting work. No matter how perfect we might appear to other people or how skilled we might be at some particular thing, we still have a tendency to think about the ways in which we're not good enough. Just in the same way that you could receive like 100 compliments in one day, but you focus on the one negative thing that somebody tells you. And on top of that, we see our imperfections or awkwardness or differences as far more significant than anything about us or how we show up online that really matters. Sadly, even more than the good we do in the world, the kindness we show to others, or the love we share. We live in a time where we not only value unattainable images of beauty and style, we also generally value work over play. And we're often caught in a vicious cycle of, I am not enough. to overcome feelings of insecurity about our talent or our appearance, or how good a blogger or mom or artist or wife or girlfriend or fill in the blank we are. Many of us have become endless doers and pleasers. I think this quote from Tara Rodden Robinson says it all. Scarcity tells you that you are not enough now, and you must be more to have some chance of being enough in the future. Being more usually gets translated into doing more. Because you are not enough, you can never do enough to become enough. This leads to an ongoing tap dance of overcommitment, workaholism, and supersized ambition that is never satiated. Last month, I posted the following question on Instagram in the form of a sketchbook spread. So something that I doodled on an airplane once. And it's a question I've been thinking about a lot lately, partly because I've been feeling burned out after 10 years of hard work, long hours pursuing my career as an illustrator. Worked with over 60 clients, written and illustrated over 15 books, 7 of them my own books. And I'm thinking about this question a lot also because I realize as a culture we spend a lot of time thinking about stuff that doesn't really matter in the end, like how fat we think we are, how many wrinkles we might have as we're aging, or how awkward we appear in photos. We spend a lot of time thinking about what is wrong with us. Over 90 people commented when I posted this sketchbook spread on Instagram, and not one person said, beauty, perfection, success, hard work, flawless skin, fitting in, being skinny. What people did say was things like this: balance, self-acceptance, simplicity, healthy habits, peaceful inner dialogue, creative expression, mindfulness, curiosity, animals, cat curled on my lap, family, unstructured time, community, generosity, salt bath, gratitude, play, and of course, love. This is an amalgamation of most of the common responses to my query. So where's the problem? The problem lies in the fact that many of us, not all of us to be sure, live our lives in pursuit of success by hard work. When people ask us how we're doing, we answer, "I'm busy," as if it were a badge of honor that we could wear around. As if being busy somehow makes us better than everyone else. As if someone will think we're a slacker if we've not been pursuing our career with fervor, or keeping in excellent physical shape by training for a marathon, or even making the most of our weekend by cramming in as many activities as we can and Instagramming all of them. And still, especially if we're women, that feels internally like it's not enough. There must be something else I should be doing to promote my business. I must think of that next most clever idea from my blog to make myself stand out. I must Instagram at least 3 times a day to keep building my following, and all of these images must be absolutely perfect. I must make myself and my life appear happy and perfectly styled, and on and on. And we are on, ultimately, the pursuit of perfection. Yet, when you talk to most hardworking people in the Western world, they'll tell you, "I'm tired." They feel they are working too much. We are burned out, depressed, exhausted, anxious. And then, ironically, to escape, what do? We go on our phones some more. Instead of interacting with friends or family or chilling out, we're constantly distracted by email and media and endless options to occupy our brain and numb us from the way we feel. Some people admit that they're literally addicted to their phones and to email. They don't know how to turn them off. Last year, the Harvard study of adult development was released. It is the longest running study of adult development in the history of mankind. It's now 76 years old. And what they learned matches what most people told me in my question, what makes a good life? They learned at the core of happiness is connection. Essentially, what makes a good life is love. That good relationships keep us happier and healthier. And we are not just talking about romantic relationships. We're also talking about friendships and family relationships. Those matter just as much. They also learned that the opposite of connection, which is loneliness and isolation, leads to a decline in brain function and health. And they learned that it's not the number of friends or relationships you have, it's the quality. Warm relationships make us happier than high conflict relationships. Don't bother with those. The people who fare best are the people who lean into their relationships, who actually use their relationships for support. They also learn that the ability to play is a better indicator of late in life happiness than income. They found that older adults with positive outlooks process emotional information differently from those with more negative views. On many accounts, I have a good life. I have a successful career as an artist and illustrator. I'm in a happy relationship. I have good friends. But earlier this year, I also came to terms with the fact that I was increasingly unhappy. I was beginning, after 10 years of this grind, to question whether I could continue this way. I was working 60 to 70 hours a week on multiple books and illustration projects at one time. I had less time than I'd ever had before to spend with family and friends, to play, to relax. I was exhausted. Most of the time when I stand on stages like this, people want me to talk about my journey, all of the stuff that led up to this point. And a lot of the time I do that. In a nutshell, what I talk about is some combination of hard work and discipline, bravery, risk-taking, professionalism, and self-promotion. That's the formula right there. But let's be clear, there's nothing wrong with any of these things. The problem is that when you prioritize hard work and discipline over all else, you will eventually get really tired. For one, we don't talk openly about how much work it takes to build your business. How many of you have jobs outside of your blog or art or craft business? Look around you. That's like at least half the room. And that work is endless. It's endless even before you begin to make money at it, right? And then we don't talk about what happens when you do begin to make money and have opportunities. We don't talk about the other side of success. What happens to bloggers and artists and designers when they do sort of reach this point where they have a cornucopia of opportunity, things coming at them. We work towards getting to that place, of course, that's the goal. We have financial freedom and choices. And we might even imagine that when we get to that place, that it will actually be easier and less stressful. Everything will be magical. But actually, it gets harder. In my own career, I began facing an email box that was overflowing, and the choices between the opportunities overwhelmed me. And I was ill-equipped to navigate how to make those choices. So I began saying yes to just about everything. More than I had time for in a regular workday. And then I began working at night and on the weekends. And you can imagine what happened to the rest of my life. And this cycle, I liken it to a hamster wheel. How many of you had hamsters when you were little? Yeah, me too. Fluffy. Although this is a cat, actually. I draw myself as a cat when I illustrate my talks, and so it's a little misleading. Anyway, this hamster wheel cycle went on for years. Some of you may feel like you're in a little bit of a hamster wheel. We're so afraid that if we stop the hamster wheel, that something terrible will happen. Maybe this is the last opportunity I will ever have. I should definitely say yes to this. I don't have time, but I'll fit it in. Arianna Huffington, who is the editor-in-chief of the Huffington Post, in her latest book, well, maybe not her latest book, but one of her recent books, which is called Thrive, describes what she calls the third metric. The first two metrics are metrics for success, and they are described as money and power. And that's essentially when it comes down to it, what a lot of people will tell you makes up success, if you ask them. And what Huffington argues is that these two metrics may provide a sense of happiness and stability for a while, but she likens them to a two-legged stool. So for a while, you can balance on that stool without a third leg, but eventually the stool will topple over. The third metric for success, she argues, are things like well-being, wisdom, wonder, and giving. All of those things that we talked about earlier that make a good life. In January of this year, I found myself balancing on a two-legged stool. I literally looked at myself straight in the eye and I said, this has got to stop. I was losing my sense of creative inspiration and motivation. I was tired in a way I'd never been tired before. And it didn't take a rocket scientist to understand what was going on. I didn't need a therapist to tell me why I felt that way. I was burning out. I'd had a life before I became an entrepreneur that included wonder and well-being. I read books, I took long walks, I spent time with friends on a regular basis, I knew how to unwind, I left my job at 5 and went bye-bye. And so I started thinking about how I could work on going back to having a good life again, how we could get back to that third metric, which I think is something that a lot of creative entrepreneurs give up because we want to work so hard, because we have to work so hard to make a mark and build our businesses. And most of these things are really challenging for me, and I'm still struggling with many of them, these changes that I'm trying to make in my life. So I'm taking baby steps to measure my success. And I'm measuring my success now by how well I'm doing these other things, which I'm going to talk about in a second, over things like how many followers I've gained or how much income I've made. I really want to focus on this third metric as another indicator of my success. So here are a few changes I've made this year. I've begun to move my body every day again. I'm a fairly athletic person. In fact, I just wrote a book about swimming. I am very active, but I had become so incredibly sedentary in the last 2 years. How many people in this room have found that they've gotten more sedentary over the last few years, right? It's so easy because so much of what we do is where? On that screen, right? And typically you sit. So I made a commitment to move my body every day and not to train for a marathon or a race, and not to fit into a smaller dress size, but simply for the joy of moving my body. And the feeling of bliss I have after a long swim or taking my little dog Wilfredo out for a walk in my neighborhood. And I got an activity tracker, which actually fell off the week before I came here, and I had to get a new one, which arrived after I left, so that's why I don't have it on right now. When you guys probably know this, but when you're traveling, you walk so much more, right? And I'm so curious how much I've actually walked in the last 5 days, and I will never know because that damn activity tracker fell off. So part of living a good life for all of us is getting up and off our bums and moving. I also hired someone to work with me. I realized I was both lonely sitting in my studio all day by myself and struggling to run all of the various aspects of my business alone. And I realized this is a privilege. For years, I could not afford to hire someone. This is something that I worked hard for. It also required giving up an enormous amount of control. Any control freaks in the room? Yeah, so. In January, I hired this lovely, gorgeous young woman, ray of sunshine named Kristen, who not only provides me with someone to process with and talk to and collaborate with, but also someone to help lighten my load. Part of living a good life is giving up control and not trying to do everything ourselves. And now, when an opportunity arrives in my inbox, if the answer isn't hell yes, I say no. I got this idea from my friend Kelly. We were having a glass of wine, and she's also been in a similar place in her career and been having some health problems, quite frankly, worse than me, as a result of like really burning the candle at both ends. She also has a kid. I think all of you with kids, like, you've got it. Your basket is so much more full. Anyway, she said to me, so we were talking about this very idea of all the little things we can do to go back to having a good life. And she said, Lisa, because I was talking about how hard it is for me to say no, I feel guilty, or I feel like I should, or maybe if I don't, nothing good will ever happen in my life again. These crazy things we tell ourselves. And she said, I have this new filter. When anything comes into my inbox, if I don't get super excited and say, hell yes, I want to do this, the answer is no. So it's either like, it's not maybe, it's not, oh, this sounds okay. It's like only the stuff I get really excited about. So I adopted this, and it has been the most liberating thing ever. So part of living a good life is saying no to stuff, and also realizing that saying no is another way of saying what? Yes. I've also tried to go back to approaching everything as a beginner. I realized, and I have been realizing this is not like an aha thing that just happened in the last 6 months, but really over the last few years, I have realized that I was starting to lose a sense of excitement and curiosity about what I do every day, about my work as an artist. And in the beginning, I used to sit in my studio table and like pinch myself. Like, I can't, because I came from, working in an office for years and years. I started my career late in life, and I had done something that didn't feel quite so inspiring to me. So I used to be like, I can't believe I get to do this. Like, even before I was making any money, I was just like, this is the best thing ever. And then slowly, as my career grew, and I started working all of the time and having all of these opportunities, I started to get really jaded and like negative. So I've been really working hard to go back to that sense of what it feels like to approach what you do with a sense of curiosity and openness and excitement, like you have when you're first starting something and it's so romantic and exciting. So I've been working from going from, oh, I have another deadline today, that first thought that enters your mind when you wake up, to like turning that off immediately and saying, how can I approach what I do every day with a sense of curiosity and wonder, like I did 10 years ago when I was first starting out and I was sitting there at my work table in my studio pinching myself. This simple mind shift has really changed things for me. So part of living a good life is being curious and open and positive and having a more positive outlook. I'm also creating space for my relationships again. After reading that Harvard study, it was like somebody hit me over the head with a ton of bricks. Of course, it seems obvious that the root of happiness is connection. It makes perfect sense that that's what it is. And yet, we spend most of our time, many of us, in the Western world at least, not connecting. And I'm a person who's always had a lot of friendships. And in the last few years, in the midst of building my career, I spent less and less time with my friends and made more and more excuses about why I can't socialize or spend time or even hop on I moved recently from San Francisco to Portland, Oregon. And so I have a lot of new friends in Portland, but most of my friends are in San Francisco. And I wasn't even making the time to get on Skype or FaceTime and connect with them. And I've really tried to shift that as well. And also taking time for myself alone to play and relax. Part of having a good life is creating space for downtime and play and connection. Lastly, I'm working hard on embracing my imperfections. When I started this talk, I shared a story of feeling vulnerable. And I've come to understand that if I am going to live a good life, I must get comfortable with getting older and with all the parts of myself I've hated since I was a teenager. So I'm working on that every day as well. And one of the really joyful things about getting older is you do actually start to care less and less. As difficult as it is to see yourself on a video, that never goes away. There's a certain level of self-acceptance that happens, and that's really wonderful. Another part of living a good life is accepting and embracing who we are, with all of our quirks and all of our differences, and letting go of this idea of ourselves as as sort of younger, prettier, more perfect version of ourselves. And knowing that really it is our differences and our quirks that give us character as humans and really helps other people to connect with us. I've been reading a lot lately about the Japanese philosophy of wabi-sabi. So essentially, wabi-sabi is the beauty of things imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. In Japan, the concept is so ingrained in the culture, there's no direct translation for Westerners. And as a Westerner, like many of you, I was raised with this sort of Greek or Hellenic view of beauty and perfection, which values symmetry and perfect proportions and flawlessness and youth. And wabi-sabi is really different. It's the art of finding beauty and imperfection and earthiness and revering authenticity above all else, revering differences, revering imperfections. And I like to apply that philosophy to thinking about my own life. This idea of revering imperfection is actually revolutionary, especially for women in the Western world. We've been told to cover up, correct, or hide our imperfections if we do not fit into this view of beauty, and if we cannot, we are told to be ashamed of them. Entire businesses are made of selling filters on Instagram to make ourselves look younger, take away any blemish. We are bombarded with images of women with unattainably perfect bodies, even in ads targeted to inspire us to get healthy. Approximately 91% of women are unhappy with their bodies, yet only 5% of women naturally possess the body type portrayed in the media. Think about that for a second. Physical appearance aside, we also spend a lot of time attempting some unattainable idea of perfection, of pleasing others, being polite, harboring shame for the less than perfect parts of our past. And here's the thing. Shame about our real selves, about who we are at our core, where we come from, how we got to where we are, only causes us to withhold connection to others because we worry we're not deserving of love or respect or admiration. True story. When I was starting out as an artist, I had a horrible case of imposter syndrome. I felt like an imposter in the art world because I didn't study art in school, and I didn't become an artist until later in life. On many occasions, I avoided even talking to artists I admired at events like this one today because I thought they wouldn't like or respect me. I thought they were secretly saying, that's Lisa over there. She isn't a real artist like us. What I found out later was that most of those people didn't see me as any different than them, that most of my fear was based in my own shame and not in people's actual perceptions of me. And when I learned to be myself, I found that the community of people just accepted me just fine. I found connection. As we know, connection is at the root of what makes a good life. And so being the real you and finding your community of like-minded, or nurturing your community if you are already part of one, is at the root of your good life. I'm not saying it's always going to go perfectly, or that there aren't jerks out there who will try to make you feel small. But remember, when you do encounter jerks, or when you feel yourself being a jerk, because that happens too, right? Remember that being mean or snobby is just another way of avoiding connection and vulnerability. So today, as you are here in this amazing event, milling about, learning from each other, getting inspired, I encourage you to dig deep and embrace who you are, including every one of your quirks, the stuff that makes you a weirdo or different, because you're amazing just how you are. To end today, I'm going to read to you this manifesto by writer Jennifer Pastiloff, illustrated by the great Emily McDowell. And it's called The Girl Power You Are Enough Manifesto. I promise not to be an asshole to myself. Hell, I promise to love myself I will remember that my self-worth is not based on what I look like, how much I weigh, how many followers I have, or any other stupid crap that has nothing to do with who I am. I will empower other girls and women. I will be kind, fiercely kind. I will have a sense of humor. I will do my best not to gossip, create drama, or judge others or myself. I will remember that just because I've had a bad day doesn't mean I have a bad life. And even on the crappiest days, I will remember this: I am enough. I'm going to take questions after this, if you have any. If we have time, Kat? 3?
3 questions.
Okay. And we know who the boss is here. Have a great day, everyone. And thank you.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you. That was really inspiring. I'd like to know, how do you become so self-aware? Is it something that you learn over time, or do you have to be disciplined in being so reflective?
That's a question no one's ever asked me before. Think about that for a second. I assume that means you think I'm self-aware. Thank you. I think part of it comes with age. Especially if you are a person, I think I sort of began to understand in my 30s in particular that sort of self-knowledge was the first step, sort of understanding that the way through all of the anxiety I was having, and this was before the internet happened and I became part of it, which, as we all know, sort of makes your insecurities like it's like they're under a microscope, right? Or that makes them feel huger. I did go to therapy, so that was helpful. But I think that what I began to realize was that the way through all of that was really understanding why it was happening in the first place, and understanding that I was not alone, and I think from that developed this idea. Think about every good book you've ever written, or every good biography or every good autobiography, or every or every amazing comedian that stands on a stage. What are they essentially doing? They're telling vulnerable stories, right, about themselves, and they're owning those stories. And the reason people laugh or connect when they read or listen is because we all have them. And that it's like that thing where you feel really insecure about something for a very long time, to the point where you don't even ever talk about it. And then you'll hear somebody else talk about it, not necessarily on a stage, but you could be at a dinner party or at whatever. And it is this sense of relief that washes over you that you're not the only one. And then that gives you the opportunity to chime in and say, I had a similar experience or whatever. That we carry around so much shame about who we are, some parts of ourselves. And I think as I got older, I realized that I was not alone, that every single human being has a story, or has something that they're struggling with, that they don't like about themselves, and that actually telling stories about that and owning that is what makes us connect. Think about those times that you bonded with people. It's always about stuff that it's not the pretty stuff. It's not the I hit this apex in my career, or I had this accomplishment. It's like, I had this horrible thing happen to me, or I felt so ashamed, and the other person is like, I hear you, that happened to me too. So one of the things Brené Brown talks about is this idea of vulnerability as the root of connection, that we cannot actually develop rich and deep relationships with people unless we get real and be ourselves and talk about the stuff that's hard, and not just the stuff that we think is going to impress other people. And I think I realized that fairly early in my life, and I've tried to bring that into my presence online. And And not that I don't struggle with it, and not that there aren't things that I still don't talk about, because I'm still struggling with how to be real and open about them. So
I think I'll have a vulnerability hangover after this. But I really relate to what you said today. Thank you. And in terms of like, you know, just the workload and losing those bits of life, you know. And I'm only just starting out.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But I'm just wondering, you know, do you think it's the case that actually it's necessary to have a extensive period of working your ass off and then you can start sort of getting a bit of balance, or is there another way, you know, where you can perhaps achieve a bit of that, you know, ongoing?
I think that is the question that I'm not sure I know the answer to. I only know from my own experience that I ended up doing that, you know, sort of going overboard and like hustling, for lack of a better word, and saying yes to everything. And part of that was part of that was just insecurity. Like, if I don't say yes, it's never going to happen. You know, it's like I'm going to sort of jinx it. So I was just like taking advantage of every opportunity. And they weren't necessarily even opportunities that were coming to me. I was pursuing things on my own, right? Because in the beginning, that's what you have to do, because nobody knows you exist. So you have to let people know that you exist. And so I did all of that for a very long time. And I would preach. That's what I would preach. Like, you have to show up. And I still believe that that's true. Now, whether you need to burn yourself out and make yourself ill or lose connection with people in your life, I don't actually think that that's true. I think there's a better way, and that's, I think, what I wanted to try to say today. Yeah, it's easier for me to stand up here and say, well, I've already had all of these successes, so now I'm going to slow down and live the good life, you know. For those of you just starting out, you may be saying, well, maybe, you know, what does that look like for me? And I do think there's another way. And honestly, if I could do it over again, I think I might have tried to approach it differently, because I think there is a real cost to not paying attention to the third metric. And I've been very lucky in that my health has been very stable. But you hear so many stories with successful people and having all kinds of health problems and exhaustion, and people literally just quitting because they can't take it anymore.
We squeeze in one more question from this side of the room. Sorry. I thought you finished.
I can wrap this up, but
no,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
So I do think there's a better way, and so I'm going to be honest and say I'm not exactly sure what that looks like, because you do have to work really hard in the beginning. But I also feel like we should always be thinking about success as not just income and influence in the world, but also taking care of ourselves and making sure that we're building happy lives. Because what happens to your creativity when you're exhausted? You don't have any more good ideas. You're tired. You can't do it. So it's so important to get rest and rejuvenate. And, you know, I feel like a lot of my good ideas come because I get paid to have them. So I like force them out of myself. But that's no way to live or work. And I don't, you know, anyway. One more question.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Hi, Lisa.
Hello.
I've got a question about sketchbooks and practicing sketchbooks, and you get better with your art and your creativity, but how do you strike the balance between, because you share a lot of your sketchbook stuff, but how do you strike a balance between sharing and being real, and at the same time having quiet space and private time to just do your sketchbooks so you get better without anyone looking?
You know, it's funny. My sketchbooks practice, I haven't, not always, for the last 10 years, I only really started working in a sketchbook over the last, say, 4 or 5 years, the first half of my career. I thought sketching was like that thing where you like go out into a park and draw people or draw a scene. I had this very limited view of what a sketchbook was. And then I started to follow other people's work and notice that people were doing all kinds of interesting things in their sketchbooks. So I just started filling pages with designs, and then I eventually started posting them on my Instagram feed and on my blog, and now I teach sketchbook classes, and so it is this very public thing for me. But what most people don't know is that about 50% of my sketchbooks never make it onto Instagram. Sometimes I hate them so much I rip them out. I'm terrible. But I do think it's important to balance this idea of like sharing your creative process, especially if you are want to be a working artist. The way you get work and sort of make a name for yourself is actually by showing your process and showing your work. Austin Kleon wrote this great book called Show Your Work, and it's not about showing the final product, it's about showing your process, and my sketchbooks are part of my creative ideation, and so I share them a lot, but there are also times when I am just sort of like messing around and having quiet time in my sketchbooks, and not every single one of them has to be shared. And I think that, there's this, I'm just gonna give one last final thought, and that is, there's this idea that if I don't record it and share it, it doesn't exist. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Yeah. It's this idea now that in the creative process, if you don't actually share it and no one finds out about it, that it isn't real. And I think that's so dangerous to go there. And I fall into it too. Like, I made this thing, I must share it, even though I'm not even sure how I feel about it, which is okay too. Like, it's obviously okay to share things that are imperfect or in process. I think that's often inspiring to other people. But, and why I do a lot of these daily and weekly projects is because I like to show the growth of my work over time. I think it's important for people to see that artists don't just show up and know how to draw and paint or have this all figured out. Like, we're always growing and learning and getting better, and part of that is sharing, but part of that is also allowing yourself to have this private space to do that no one ever sees. And I must say one last thing, and that is that part of the reason I show so many of my sketchbooks is that 90% of the work I do, I can't share. Because I'm working on a book that won't be published for a year, or I'm doing a job for a client that I'm actually not allowed to post on Instagram. And so part of how I keep people engaged with what I'm doing, which is part of how I work as an artist, is by sharing my own personal work. Because eventually I can share that book or potentially that illustration job, but what most people don't see is that, I'm doing client work all day long and I'm not taking pictures of it and posting it. So I have to have something to share, and so my sketchbooks are really the place for me to do that. But I also think that whatever your creative journey is can and should, parts of it, be very private, and those parts should be just as honored and revered by you as the parts that you share and, and that other people enjoy and like. So